Since I bought the Leica M11 a few months ago, I've been sharing videos here on the channel all about the pictures I've made, the prints, how I edit the photos. I'm going to continue sharing as much as I can as I use this camera here on the channel. But today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go back in time. We're going to revisit the Nikon D60. This was my very first DSLR I ever bought. Not this particular one. I bought this just a couple of months ago for under $100. That's the camera body and the lens. I bought that from today's sponsor, KEH Camera, which it's the best place to buy or sell any used photography gear, and I'll tell you more about them in a little bit. But I bought this camera for under $100, and it came out in 2008, and I wanted to share, just a little bit of information about the camera, how I used it back in the day, and it kind of got me started. But more than anything, in this day and age, 2023, a camera this old, 10 megapixels, and obviously plenty of other limitations in the older technology, what can you still do with it, and how usable is it? Is it still enough? We'll talk a little bit about that today. The first camera that I got when I really started to take photography serious after I kind of just fell in love with it was this Minolta XGM. I bought this for $50 on eBay with this 50mm lens, and for a couple of years this was my only camera. I used this for pretty much anything. I was kind of like how I am now with my camera. I would just take it with me, whether I was around family, friends, skateboarding, shows, like whatever I was doing, this was the camera I would always take with me. Obviously for, a 15, 16-year-old kid, the film, even back then, was pretty expensive. After a few years of shooting with the XGM, I think my parents could tell just how serious I was about photography and how I basically carried this thing with me everywhere. And, moving forward, started thinking about the ideas of possibly a career and, doing photography for a living. Started looking into digital cameras, realizing how much it was going to take for me to save up back then. And my dad, being the dad that he was, he knew how serious this was to me. He knew that I really didn't care about anything else. And he said, if you're serious about this, especially if you're going to try and make money with it, I'll take you to the store. I'll help you get your first real camera, and we'll get it started. I didn't know anything about different camera brands or what model to get or anything like that. We went to the classic, photography store, Sam's Club, and I think there was probably like a Canon Rebel, the Nikon D60, and maybe something else. And I knew of Nikon. I had heard of Nikon at that point, so I was like, yeah, we'll go with that one. This was like right before my senior year, which I graduated in 2009. So this was like summer of 2008. The camera had been out for about half a year at that point. The Nikon D60 was released in January of 2008. This was the successor to the D40X. It's a 10.2 megapixel crop sensor DSLR. I think when we got this camera with the kit lens, it was around $650 to $750, which at the time, like in my mind, it felt like my dad was just tossing me the keys to a brand new car. Like this was game changing to me. I felt like, oh, I've made it now. Shooting my friends' MySpace profile pictures, going to local shows or the skate park, or skating some, little sidewalk that we have here in Chillicothe. This thing was just everything to me. And now it feels so small and plastic, and it's just so weird picking this thing up, but it still gives me back like all of those feelings and memories. Just when I first turned this thing on and seeing the little classic load up and the back screen of the camera, it immediately just filled my mind with all this nostalgia. And Elliot has been using this Minolta XGM for a couple of years, and it's starting to have some issues, so he hasn't used it that much lately, but he has been picking up the D60 and running around with it. And, for a kid his age, 6 years old, under $100 for the camera body and lens, I think with shipping included too. It's fun to be able to hand this off to him, and every once in a while I'll just turn the camera on, check through some photos, and I'll see he's taking a couple snapshots on there. So he's enjoying it, he's having fun, and I feel better about handing that to him than the M11. And whether or not something like this is, limiting this older technology, it doesn't have to be the D60 specifically. Just look at just a few years ago, a camera model that's only 1 or 2 generations behind the current one. How much of a limitation is that? Because again, when new cameras come out, we're always looking at the new specs. What have they changed? What have they improved? Is it time to upgrade, I think a lot of that has to do with perspective, really, on like what your needs really are and what you're coming from. Because for me, the XGM with a 50mm lens, I obviously couldn't see the photos as I was trying to figure out what exposure even meant. One lens, I was limited to the film speed. Picking up this, it felt like I just had the cheat codes. I was like, oh, I can see my photos now. Oh, and it has autofocus. I can zoom in and out. Like, it just completely changed everything for me. But if you take this camera now and hand it to somebody who's used to using, a modern camera, it's going to feel like they're being handcuffed. And that's all to do with perspective. With the D60, what are some of the limitations that this camera would have? First off, the sensor, 10.2 megapixels. This is coming from someone who owns a 60 megapixel camera. So are megapixels everything? Absolutely not. Do they give you flexibility and room? People talk a lot about big prints and things like that. Something like this is fully capable of making an 8x10, 11x14, even probably a 16x20, and you'd be all right with it. With a 10.2 megapixel sensor, are you going to be able to crop as much? Probably not. But what are you doing with the photo? How big is it going to be? How big is it going to be displayed when you're showing it to anybody, whether that be on the wall or just on the phone? If you're only uploading online, 10 megapixels, still plenty. Low light performance, this camera has ISO 100 to 1600 and then one little high sort of boost mode, bringing it up to 3200. It's a crop sensor camera, so you're not going to have a full frame sensor. On top of that, you have the 18 to 55, this kit lens. It's definitely not the sharpest lens. It's also a variable aperture, so as you zoom the lens in, your aperture is going to need to stop down a little bit. But I think any photographer, who knows what they're doing, any capable photographer, they could take this camera and make great work with it, without a doubt. These were entry-level cameras, so they were made to be as easy as possible to use and for someone who isn't already familiar with photography. But if you throw this into manual mode and you've got full manual control over all of your exposure, everything you're doing, it's going to be just like any other camera out there, obviously with a few limitations. And we're going to find out what all this camera can do. I want to bring this a few more places this year, and let's see what we can do with a 10 megapixel camera all these years later. Maybe we'll do a little side-by-side comparison with the M11, $100 versus a lot more than that. We'll have some fun with it, but really I just want to show what you can do with the camera that you already have, because I know myself personally, I've been in there before, and I'm sure a lot of you watching this video have as well, where you're thinking about the camera you're saving up for, or the lens you're saving up for, whatever it may be. You're thinking about what you're going to get and how that's going to make it better or just kind of take things to the next level. It's really not about that. It's always about you and what you do with the camera. If I were to take my D60 files and my M11 files and did some editing, sure, if I was in Lightroom and zooming in and comparing the files, I'm obviously going to see a difference there. And if I tried to shoot side by side of the same thing, you might be able to see a difference there, different focal lengths, compression, sensor size, all that stuff. But if I just took a handful of black and white photos from my M11 and a handful of black and white from the D60 and threw them up on Instagram where they're that big, I really don't think people would be able to tell the difference. Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll put that to test, but really, $100, less than $100, something like this, that at the time when I first got it, it felt life-changing to me. So all the cameras that are out there nowadays, especially on the used market, there's a lot out there that are more than capable. With that in mind, if you're looking to buy, sell, or trade any used gear, today's sponsor, KEH Camera, is the place to do it. You don't have to start the new year off with a brand new camera. You can start with something all the way back from 2008 or older. KEH has a massive inventory. They've been buying, selling, and trading used photography gear for over 40 years. On top of their massive inventory, KEH has a risk-free 21-day return policy for thousands of their items, along with a 180-day warranty included. If you'd like to trade in or sell any of your old gear and upgrade to something new, they also have a quoting system on their website that's available 24/7, or you could schedule a video chat with one of their buyers to go over things more thoroughly. If you'd like to support the channel anytime you're shopping at KEH, make sure you use one of the affiliate links down below. That goes a long way at no extra cost to you. As a matter of fact, for a discount on your order or a bonus on your quote, make sure you use my official codes on the screen and in the description right now. That way you don't miss out on any savings when you're shopping with KEH. That's it for this one. If you guys have any questions or thoughts on the D60, if you have any other older cameras that you're still shooting with, I'd love to hear it down below, or anything that you'd like to see me shoot specifically with the D60. We'll have some fun with this one this year, but that's it for today. I love you all. Thank you all so much for everything. I'll see you guys soon.